I never imagined that a simple yellowed envelope, forgotten at the bottom of a box in the attic, could destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered that my parents had been keeping a secret for over 3 decades, a secret so deep that when it finally came to light, it completely changed who I thought I was. It all started on an ordinary Saturday in March. My mom had asked me to help her organize the attic of the house where I grew up, that typical suburban home with a white picket fence in Ohio. You know, that kind of tedious task you put off for months? Well, the day finally arrived. She was busy donating old clothes while I rummaged through dusty boxes filled with Christmas decorations and faded photo albums. There was something comforting about that musty smell mixed with memories, as if each object told a silent story about our family. Then I found that particular box. Unlike the others, it was hidden behind a stack of old suitcases, as if someone deliberately wanted to keep it out of sight. The box was dark wood, heavy, with a rusty lock that no longer worked. My curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I found photos I'd never seen before. They weren't the typical family photos smiling for the camera. They were black and white images of people I didn't recognize, documents in a language that sounded like Russian or something Eastern European, and that yellowed envelope that would change everything. My hands were shaking as I picked up the envelope. It had my father's name handwritten on it, but it wasn't the name I knew. It read Dmitry Volkov in careful handwriting. My father's name is David Miller. He's always been David Miller. I opened the envelope slowly, as if I knew once I did, there was no going back. Inside were letters, some in English, some in Russian, and a document that appeared to be a birth certificate, but it wasn't my father's birth certificate, the one I'd seen before when I needed his passport for a trip. At that moment, I heard my mother's footsteps coming up the attic stairs. Normally, I would have hidden everything immediately, but something inside me refused to do so. When she reached the top of the stairs and saw what I held in my hands, her face drained of color. It literally turned white as a sheet. She didn't say anything for several long seconds, just stood there, clutching a box of Christmas decorations to her chest like a shield. "Mom," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Who's Dmitry Volkov?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the wind outside swaying the trees, the creaking of the old attic floorboards. She set the box down slowly, as if buying time to think about what to say. "Sarah," she finally whispered, "we need to talk to your father." The way she said it, with that tone of inevitability, made me realize this wasn't just a little family secret. This was something big, something that had been buried deep for a reason. We walked downstairs in silence. My father was in the living room watching the basketball game, completely oblivious to the bomb that was about to explode. When he saw my mother, and then the envelope in my hands, the remote fell from his lap. He knew. Of course he knew. The expression on his face was one of pure panic mixed with something that seemed almost like relief, as if he had carried this weight for so long that part of him was grateful to finally be able to let it go. "Sit down, Sarah," my dad said, turning off the TV. I sat on the couch where I'd spent countless family movie nights, where I'd opened Christmas presents, where I'd studied for school tests. Everything about the place was familiar, but suddenly it felt like I was in a strange house. My father began to speak, and what he told me over the next 2 hours sounded like something out of a spy movie. He was born Dmitry Volkov in Moscow in 1962, the son of a Soviet scientist working on a classified program during the Cold War. When Dmitry was just 23, his father discovered something in the program he worked on, something that left him morally destroyed. My grandfather, whom I never met, made the devastating decision to defect to the United States, bringing with him sensitive information that could compromise the Soviet program. But here's the part that left me cold. They couldn't bring the whole family at once. It was too risky. The plan was for my grandfather to come first, establish a new identity, and then find a way to bring my grandmother and father. But something went terribly wrong. 3 weeks after my grandfather arrived in the United States, he died in a car accident that my father told me with tears in his eyes, was never really investigated properly. It took me years to get out of Russia, my father continued, his voice breaking. Your grandmother stayed behind. She made me promise that I would live, that I would find safety, that I would have the life she and my father wanted for me. He paused, wiping his eyes. She died 2 years after I made it here. They said it was a heart attack, but I never knew the truth. My mother took my hand. Tears streamed down her face. I met your father in 1989, she said softly. He told me everything before we got married. We decided together that it would be safer to keep the past buried, to create a new life, to protect any family we might have. She looked at me with both love and fear in her eyes. To protect you? I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. So it was all a lie? My whole life? The stories about the Miller family, the cousins I never met because they lived far away, the excuses for why we never visited relatives? My voice was rising, anger beginning to replace the initial shock. It wasn't all a lie, honey, my father said quickly. Our love for you, every memory we made together, every moment was real. The only thing that wasn't real was my name and my story before I met your mother. But the man who raised you, the father who taught you to ride a bike, who drove you to school every day, who stayed up all night when you were sick, that man is absolutely real. I wanted to be furious. Part of me was. But looking at my parents, seeing the genuine pain and fear on their faces, I began to understand the magnitude of what they had carried alone all these years. They had lived with the constant terror that the past might catch up with them, that something might threaten the life they had built, that I might be in danger. Does anyone else know? I asked, my mind racing with the implications. Are we in danger now? Is someone looking for you? The questions came out faster than I could process the answers. My father shook his head. The Cold War is long over. Most of the people involved in that program are dead or retired, but I never wanted to risk it. I never wanted you to live looking over your shoulder, like I did in my first years here. He took a deep breath. I was processed by the American government when I arrived. I was given asylum, a new identity, a chance to start over. They helped me officially become David Miller. Everything was legal, documented, but kept confidential. Over the next few weeks, my father showed me everything. There were more boxes, more documents, photographs of a family I'd never met. I saw pictures of my grandfather, a serious man with gentle eyes that seemed incredibly familiar because they were the same eyes as my father's, the same eyes I see in the mirror every day. There were pictures of my grandmother, a beautiful woman with a sad smile, holding a baby who would grow up to be my father. There were letters written in Russian that my father translated for me, letters filled with love and longing and hope that one day they would be together again. One letter in particular destroyed me. It was the last one my grandmother wrote to my father before she died. In it, she said, "My dear Dmitri, don't cry for me. Live your life joyfully. Get married, have children, tell them about the stars as I told you. You will carry our family forward, and in that, I will live forever." When my father read this to me, we both cried. I began asking questions about Russian culture, about the family I'd never known, about the traditions lost when my father had to leave everything behind. He told me about winters in Moscow, about how his mother made a borscht that warmed not only the body, but also the soul, about how his father used to take him to the planetarium and point out the constellations, talking about the mysteries of the universe. "You've always been fascinated by astronomy," my father said with a wet smile. "Remember when you were 8 and asked for a telescope for Christmas? I cried that night after you went to sleep. Not out of sadness, but because I saw my father in you. That same wonder, that same curiosity about the universe. But the revelation didn't just affect my understanding of the past. It changed my present and my future. I began to question my own identity. Who was I? Sarah Miller, the American girl with a normal Midwestern childhood? Or Sarah Volkov, the granddaughter of a Soviet defector, the bearer of a legacy I never knew existed? This identity crisis affected everything. My relationship with my then boyfriend became strained because I couldn't explain why I was suddenly so distant, so lost in thought. My work suffered because I couldn't concentrate. I spent sleepless nights surfing the internet, trying to find any information about Dmitry Volkov or the program my grandfather worked on. I found some declassified records, vague mentions in historical documents, but nothing concrete. What really helped me was when my father suggested we seek out the Russian community in the neighboring town. There was a Russian Orthodox church there, and although my father had never been there after changing his identity, he thought it might help me connect with the roots I had just discovered. It was strange at first, entering that sacred space with its golden icons and the smell of incense, hearing chants in a language that was part of my DNA but completely foreign to my ears. But there was a moment during a service when the choir began to sing, and I saw my father close his eyes, tears streaming down his face, and I realized he was home for the first time in decades. And somehow, so was I. It wasn't about choosing to be American or Russian. It was about embracing the full complexity of my story, all the pain and sacrifice that made my existence possible. I started learning Russian. It wasn't easy, especially for someone in my 20s, but my father was so happy every time I practiced with him. We watched Russian movies together, and he taught me how to cook recipes from his childhood. My mother joined in, reminiscing about how my father had shared these things with her when they were newlyweds, how she had learned to make pelmeni so he could have a taste of home. But not everything was comforting. There was anger too. Anger for all the times I'd lied on family tree projects in school. Anger for not having grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, an entire family that should have been mine. Anger that other people's choices, decisions made in secret rooms during the Cold War had stolen so much from my family. One day, 6 months after the discovery, I had a nasty argument with my father. I screamed at him about how cowardly he had been for hiding who he was, how he had robbed me of the right to know my own heritage. The words were cruel, and I regretted them the moment they left my mouth, but I couldn't take them back. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something I'll never forget. "You're right to be angry. I would take this pain away from you if I could, but I can't. All I can say is that every decision I made was about trying to give you something I never had: security, peace, a life without fear. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have told you sooner, but I love you more than anything in this world, and that was never a secret." That conversation broke something inside me, but in a good way. I started processing everything in a healthier way. I sought therapy, which helped enormously. My therapist helped me see that identity isn't fixed, but fluid, that I could honor all parts of who I was without denying any of them. Eventually, I decided to take a DNA test, not necessarily to find relatives, but to see my genetic heritage mapped out on a chart. When the results came back showing 50% Eastern European, 25% Scandinavian from my mother, and a mix of other things, it wasn't a surprise, but it was validation. This was real. My new understanding of myself was grounded in something concrete. The most surprising part? The DNA test actually connected me with some distant relatives in Russia, second cousins who shared my great-grandfather. Through translated messages and awkward video calls, I began to meet people who shared my nose, my father's laugh. They had family stories, old photos, memories that filled in gaps you never knew existed. One of these cousins, Katya, was only a few years older than me and spoke reasonably good English. We connected immediately. She told me about life in modern Russia, so different from the Soviet Union my father left behind. She told me about our great-grandmother, who lived to be 95 and always wondered what had happened to her grandson Dmitry, who suddenly disappeared and was never seen again. She used to set an extra place at the table on New Year's, Katya told me through the computer screen, just in case you came back. Until the day she died, she waited. That broke my heart in ways I hadn't expected. Today, more than a year after that attic discovery, I'm in a different place. I'm still processing everything, and I honestly think I will be for the rest of my life. But I've also found a richness in my identity that I didn't have before. I celebrate Russian New Year in January and American New Year in December. I make pierogi with my dad and mac and cheese with my mom. I'm American, I'm Russian, I'm both and neither, and I'm okay with that. My relationship with my parents has also changed. It's deeper now, more honest. They're no longer just mom and dad, they're Catherine and Dmitri, two people who made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, who carried heavy secrets to give me a light life. I respect them in ways I couldn't when I thought I knew the whole story. And I learned something fundamental about family. It's not just blood or shared history. It's the people who choose to stay, who love you through secrets and revelations, through anger and forgiveness. My parents chose to protect me in every way they knew how. Now I choose to honor their sacrifice by living fully, embracing all the complicated and beautiful mess of our family history. If you're watching this and have your own family secrets, or recently discovered something that changed how you see yourself, I want you to know that you're not alone. Identity is complicated. Family is complicated. And it's okay not to have all the answers right away. Give yourself permission to feel it all. The anger, the confusion, the pain, but also the curiosity, the excitement of discovering new pieces of who you are. The yellowed envelope still sits on my nightstand. Every now and then, I pick it up and reread the letters, touching the words my grandmother wrote so many decades ago. And though I never met her, I feel her presence in my life. She's there every time my father looks at me with pride, in every recipe we learn to make together, in every story he finally feels free to tell. Our past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. We are the sum of every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of courage from the people who came before us. And now I carry the story of the Volkovs and the Millers, honoring both, as I write my own chapter. This is my truth, and I am finally at peace with it.